You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, I'm very excited for our guest today. It's not often we get to have a World Series champion and author joining us on this program.
Yes, it is an honor. He's a former Major League Baseball player, played 8 seasons. He was a part of the 1969 Miracle New York Mets team that won the World Series. And he wrote one of his two books about that after the Miracle, The Lasting Brotherhood of the 1969 Mets. We're very excited to have him on. He's a pioneer in terms of growing the presence of baseball among the Jewish population. He's 1994 Jewish Hall of Fame inductee, so we'll talk about that too. Really excited to have him on. Really honored. Art Shamsky, Art, welcome to the show. How are you today?
My pleasure, guys. It's good to be here. I'm fine, thank you.
Great. We're very excited to have you here. So let's take you back to your childhood here. When did you start playing baseball? And at what point did you realize, hey, maybe I have a chance here to turn this into a profession?
Well, my dad, I grew up in the Midwest, St. Louis. I was a big Cardinal fan. My dad kind of got me into it. He was a big St. Louis Cardinal fan. But the memory I have is that as soon as I could walk, he was out there, soft tossing with me. And where I grew up in the Midwest, in that area, there was a lot of great baseball was organized really well. We didn't have a little league. It was really called the Corey League, Khoury, named after this gentleman who started it. And that was pre what we called the little league at the time. And from that point on, from the time I was 7 and 8 when we started, I always played against really good players, and I think that area developed so many good players over the years. And I think that was one of the real reasons that I kind of developed, and not that I was better than anybody else, but I knew that I loved the game and got a chance to play with and against some really good players. And the other thing I think that I remember about growing up is that all my friends, all they wanted to do was play baseball too. I mean, we played other sports, but for all intents and purposes, baseball was the one thing that we really enjoyed. And on summer days when it was nice out, when it was a little bit safer than it is now, we'd ride our bikes to the park and make up games. And we didn't need 18 players. We just made up games, 3 or 4 on each side. And that's really how I learned the game. And the good thing is my friends, even though they probably would have wanted to make it to the big leagues, none of them did, but they were really instrumental in my life in terms of me really kind of learning the game and loving the game. And I just really had a lot of good friends that kind of were there when I needed to play some sports and be involved in baseball. So I think that's really what I remember about growing up.
Yeah, Nick and I are fortunate because we grew up on Staten Island, and there are a lot of parks here, a lot of grass fields, a lot of little leagues. Now all my friends play baseball. A lot of concrete schoolyard playgrounds that are big enough. We used to have pickup baseball games when we were younger, so we could definitely relate there. You were drafted by the Cincinnati Reds. Tell us about that.
Well, I wasn't drafted because that was before the draft came into existence. I signed with the Cincinnati Reds when I was just turned 18 years old. I couldn't sign when I was 17. I had about 9 or 10 teams that were interested in me. Remember back then there was 18 teams. There was just 2 leagues of 16 teams. There was just 2 leagues of 8 teams in the National League and 8 in the American League. And I had a bunch of teams that were interested in me. But the Reds, they really treated me well. I remember they worked me out at the Cardinals ballpark at the time was Sportsman's Park and became Busch Stadium. But I remember working out on the field. Fred Hutchinson was the manager, and I remember Wally Moses, who went on to have a big league career as a coach, was the batting coach. And I was on this field at 17 years old before I could sign, hitting with these big league players in this major league ballpark, and they really kind of swayed me on the fact that I thought I'd really want to play for the Cincinnati Reds. Although I did still love the Cardinals, the fact is it was an opportunity to sign with a team not other than St. Louis, but I think that was really the key to me, was that the way they treated me. And I remember being on that game that I worked out at 17 years old. I was taking batting practice with the extra men on the team, the Cincinnati Reds at the time. And I remember one of them was Don Newcomb, the great pitcher from the Dodgers era, who ended up with Cincinnati. And remember, Jerry Lynch was on that team, Ed Bailey, some of these guys that I grew up watching as a kid, and I was mesmerized by being in that opportunity to be on the field with them. And I was a skitty kid, about 150 pounds. And remember, they had those cut uniforms with the half the jerseys were kind of cut at the sleeves. So it was really kind of out of place, but it was really for me an opportunity to really get involved in the big leagues in terms of being around these players. And that really swayed me on signing with the Reds, and went on to play in the minor league system there for almost 5 years, and then came up with some great players and played with great players. We're part of the Cincinnati Red organization. That a number of them were involved in being part of the Big Red Machine in the mid 70s. But those years in the minor leagues with the Reds were really special for me because I developed some great friendships and really had some wonderful experiences of being in the minor leagues with them.
What do you remember about experiencing your first professional season and reporting for your first season in the minor leagues? And what was it like being roommates with the all-time hit king, Pete Rose?
Yeah, I started, our first year together was 1960, a small town upstate in New York, Geneva, New York, which is up in the Finger Lakes area. And that was the lowest classification you could possibly be. It was the New York Penn League. Went to spring training. Pete didn't join us till his class graduated. I believe he got there in June, but on that team was myself and Tony Perez, and Tony didn't speak English very well, and he went on to have the great careers in the Hall of Fame. But when Pete joined us, it was all of us together. Probably, I don't even think any of us were prospects. We were suspects at that time. We were so bad. We were so bad. We got the manager fired during the course of the year. I'll never forget that. This is Class D, New York Penn League. I think it was Geneva, Corning, Elmira, Wellsville, Auburn, New York, and Erie, Pennsylvania. And we got $1.50 a day meal money. That was our meal money. We traveled. The only time we stayed overnight was when we went to Erie. Every other team, the other park we went to, we would come back after the game. But it was a great experience. And going to spring training that year, not knowing anybody, it was, being away from home is always a little bit of a I don't know, frightful is not the right word, but just always a new experience. And you meet new people, and you just don't know where you're going to end up. You just hope that you can get to the next level at some point. Your dream is always about getting to the big leagues, but now you're a professional and went to spring training. We trained in Tampa, Florida. And the big league team was there also, but we trained at a little complex that was out of the downtown area. And I just, to be part of that was just really not knowing what was going to happen in the future, but you start dreaming about things that might happen to you. And I think what happened is that you just want to get to the next level. Back in those days, remember, with only the 16 teams, they didn't expand till 1962 to 20. I mean, you're just trying to get to the next level. It was D, C, B, A, double A, triple A. And so you really kind of just hoping that next year you might go up a level. God willing, you might go 2 levels. But it was so tough back then because there were so many good players. And I saw guys in the minor leagues that especially as I moved up, that if you would have said to me, they're not going to make it to the big leagues for whatever reason, I would have said, you're crazy. They can run, throw, hit, field, got great arms as pitchers, but something happened to them. They either got hurt or they were weeded out. And remember, again, there's not that many teams, so there's not that many opportunities. And so until expansion in 62, when they went to 20 teams, and then of course in 69 they went to 24 teams, that opened up a lot more opportunities. But back in those early days, you never knew what was going to happen because it was so tough. And consequently, you played against guys that really were good ball players, but were in the same position as you. There was no room for them, say, in the big league level, but so they had to come back to play AAA ball. Instead of 1 year, it was 2 years. And so that was the process back then. And I know there's a long-winded answer to the question about my first year, but really kind of led into all these years of trying to make it to the next level. And that was really what we tried to do. But I will say this, I played with and against some terrific players in the minor leagues. And as I got to the AAA, which is the level below the big leagues, I played against guys that I just were in the same position as me. Couldn't make it because when I, thought I could make it to the big leagues, the Reds had Frank Robinson in right field, Vada Pinson in center, Tommy Harper, Darren Johnson, Pete Rose was even playing a little left field at the time. So I had to play 2 years of AAA baseball, and I got a chance to play against some of the really terrific players who went on to have Hall of Fame careers, but they were still in the minor leagues because there was no room in the big leagues. And I really believe in today's game, not to take it any further away from what your question was, but I really believe guys are rushed to the big leagues now, and they don't get an opportunity to play against quality players in the minor leagues, and consequently they're rushed to the big leagues. And I don't think they're really prepared because they don't face the really tough competition in the minor leagues to really learn the game. But that could be another podcast for another time, but that's the reality of the situation. But back then it was really tough to get from one level to the next because there was so many good players and not a lot of room.
That was a really sufficient and terrific answer, and there was a lot to unpack there. So I'll start by saying baseball has expanded a few times since then. The scope of the minor league system has expanded, and now due to the ongoing pandemic, a lot of that has since been narrowed down a little bit. So hopefully we can reach the point where we can be able to see the minor league system flourish again. But back to your playing career, you played 8 seasons. Some of your best seasons came later on with the Mets, which Nick is going to get to. He's going to follow up this question with this, but kind of started talking about it a little bit. I want to get your opinion on what specific thing within the game itself do you think has changed the most since you were playing, for better or for worse?
The game is not the game that I grew up with anymore, and it's not the game that I played. It's all about the home runs and RBIs. There's no small ball anymore. Maybe there's a little bit of small ball in the National League. American League, there is no small ball. There's no reason to, with a designated hitter, nobody's really going to bunt for all intents and purposes. Not going to hit and run. Very little stealing. National League plays it a little bit different. The game has changed in that respect. You still have to run, throw, hit, field, and pitch. There's no doubt about that. And I love the game, but it's just not the game that I grew up with and remember. It's tough for me to watch it. I love the game, but it's tough for me to watch it because it seems like every at bat takes 10 minutes. You don't see anybody just step out real quick, look at the third base coach, and right back in the batter's box. And so for me, the game is so slow, and it was so much more fast paced when I played and when I grew up. And so I think that's really the biggest change. And now I'm seeing where they're experimenting with maybe moving the pitcher's mound back another foot. They're going to expand the bases a little bit. I don't know what that's going to do to the game. I don't know what's going to do to records if they
Right.
in the big league. So it's all kind of little upside down right now, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. But the game it's just different than when I played. I mean, I still love it. I'll watch an at bat occasionally, but it's really tough for me to watch a full game because it's just so slow. I do, however, check box scores, and I'll look at a box score and I'll see strikeouts, how many strikeouts a game, how many walks, how many pitchers in a game, and then time a game. Those are the 4 things I look at. And as you probably know, you guys follow the game. Every game seems like it's got 20 or more strikeouts. Every game's got 8 to 12 walks, 9 to 12 pitchers, and time a game usually is either 3 hours or more. If not, it's a little less than 3 hours. But I just think the game is just too slow for me personally. But I'm jaded because I played it at a time when it was much more fast-paced and grew up with a game like that. And so I think kids who were born, or young people who were born, say after 85 or 90, no, they don't know the difference. This is the game that they see, and they either like it or they don't like it. But they just don't know how it was back in those days. And I think it was a better optic for fans watching the game back then, a number of years ago, than it is now. I just think it's just tough. The thing that bothers me as we talk about this is that everybody says, oh, they love the DH. They really like the DH. And I look at these things and I see the DH. Yeah, the guy can hit a home run once in a while, but 2 or 3 times a game he's striking out.
Right.
So I'm just not sure I understand that whole mentality about doing it that way. And I think the fans see. I like that you play in the National League. Let me qualify this, but if I was playing right now, I would love the DH as a hitter and a chance to prolong my career. I would love it. But as a fan, I like the bunt situation. I like where the third baseman's breaking in, the shortstop's going to third or second baseman's covering first, the first baseman's breaking in. The guy can hit away or not hit away. Whatever it does, it leaves you, the fan, able to second guess the manager. It leaves open all sorts of possibilities. But I like that there's some action in the game. I don't think there's enough action in the game. And I think in this world that we live in now, you have to have action. And I think it's affecting fans. I mean, there's still a nucleus of people that love the game, and I understand that. But I wish there was more action in the game. I know that's another long-winded answer for you guys, but
no, it's great. I mean, I think unfortunately we're at a point where if you have a high school kid or a college kid who is batting 400, hitting line drives to the opposite field, but they have no power, they're being overlooked. And that's not good because those are great hitters. And that's the type of hitter I like to see. That's why I like a guy like Jeff McNeil or Brandon Nimmo with the Mets. They're throwback guys. They're just trying to get hits. But the DH point, it seems like we're heading towards a universal DH, but it's so much fun when you're watching like the Mets, and their best hitter this season has been Jacob deGrom, who's batting close to 700. He's constantly getting on base and scoring. And I agree with you that it takes away the fun of the game. You don't know about double switching and the bunting and all that. So I'm interested to see that. But a lot of changes here. I kind of think I know where you stand on this, but what are your thoughts on the extra inning rule with the runner on second base and the 7-inning doubleheaders? I know you used to play scheduled doubleheaders for 9 innings, and now we're doing 7-inning doubleheaders.
Well, again, the game has changed. It's not the runner on second base and extra inning is not something that I really like. It seems like you fight all game to get to a certain point, and then you're going to start an inning with a runner on second base. I'm not crazy about that. All these changes, I guess they're making these changes because they, being the powers to be, assume there's something wrong with the game. And I just think that if they could somehow figure out that maybe the game needs to be played better, maybe that would bring fans back. That's the way I look at it. I just don't like some of these rule changes, and I really don't hope they don't incorporate this thing they're going to experiment with moving the mound back. I think what is a foot or so, and they're going to make the bases bigger. I don't know how that would affect records that have been in the books for so many years. I just think the game it's the one game that doesn't have a clock. It's the one game that people just want to sit around and watch, but you got to have some action. And I just don't think we're getting enough of it. And it's just, you stop and think about this. You can have a young kid who starts out in Little League, who probably, as he continues to go and become a pretty good hitter, might never have to bring a glove out onto the field.
It's crazy.
I totally agree.
Never have to bring out a glove. And so that's one of the things that I see possibly happening. The other thing I see in the game today is that the starting pitcher, for all intents and purposes, with very few exceptions, I think Verlander and deGrom, there's a couple pitchers in baseball who might be the exceptions, but the starting pitcher, for all intents and purposes, never faces a guy with the game on the line.
Right.
He might argue, say, hey, in the third inning, I had the bases loaded and I got a guy to pop up, or I struck a guy out. But I'm talking about the game on the line in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. That starting pitcher, for the most part, is never in the game.
Right.
You only see those matchups now in the All-Star game. And now a lot of people feel like the All-Star game has been devalued to the point where those matchups don't matter. So you never see them unless it's in the postseason.
No, you're right. But the great news about it is it's so subjective, and we can argue and talk about it all day, and which makes it interesting. But I think if I think the people who might agree with me are probably older and been watching baseball back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe even in the early 80s. But as it changed in the mid to late 80s into the 90s into where we're at now, and kids who weren't even born or people who weren't even born now don't know what it was back then. And so they look at the game and they look at it as the way it is. And that's unfortunate because I think it was totally different back in those days. And for me, having been through it and played it, I think it's just totally different.
Yeah, I can't stand these pitch counts. And now if you're coming up in the minor leagues, you're being told pitch 5 innings. That's a great job. Imagine you told your teammate Tom Seaver, go out there and give me 5 today. They'd be like, what are you talking about?
Well, it's what's interesting about that is Tom was such a great pitcher, and I mean I could talk hours about him. I got a chance to play against him with the Reds when I came up, and then with him with the Mets, and he was just a fantastic pitcher. And I always follow up with whenever I talk about it, saying I do think history will show he's one of the greatest pitchers ever to pitch in the big leagues. But I had the luxury, guys, to play in an era that had so many great pitchers, and just the National League, for example, with Seaver and Koufax and Drysdale and Marichal and Perry and Ferguson Jenkins and Bob Gibson and Steve Carlton, and on with great and great players also. I always get that question whenever I do some speaking engagements and personal appearances. Who was your toughest pitcher? Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame? Because I played with Pete, and of course people know that. And then how does it feel to have a dog named after you and everyone loves Raymond, which is another thing. But I always get that question, don't you wish you were playing now? And my answer is, what, are you crazy? Of course I wish I was playing, making the money they're making now. But the reality of it is, I don't have my ring on right this moment, but I wouldn't trade it for that World Series ring with that 69 Met team. And the other thing is, I think it's real important for people to know this, that I played with and against, I think, the greatest conglomerate of players in the history of the game. If you look at that 60s, like 63 through 71 or 72, just that period, or 63 through 70. I mean, just look at the National League with Mays, Aaron Clemente, Frank Robinson, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Billy Williams, Orlando Cepeda, Willie McCovey. I mean, I can go on and on with names that just are in the Hall of Fame, and that's just the National League. The American League had their own set of stars. So I was very lucky to play with and against great players. So for me, that balances out that wishing I was making the money they're making now, because there's no doubt it's a lot better than when I played. But you can't look at it that life has been good. I've made some great friends, and I'm doing the podcast now, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm trying to stay connected with people. So for me, it's always important to just be able to have conversations with guys like yourself who love the game, who know the game. You might be frustrated with it at times, but it's still a great sport, and it's still the greatest game in the world as far as I'm concerned. Baseball is wonderful in a sense because, and you guys, I'm assuming you guys played it as kids, or maybe still play it now, but baseball teaches you humility. It teaches you teamwork. It teaches you how to deal with adversity. You're going to fail more than you succeed as a hitter. And so it teaches you all these wonderful things that are important in life. And so I always believe that baseball is the greatest sport.
Great points. We were going to ask about Everybody Loves Raymond, so you can cross that out.
No, you can ask about it.
John Stewart also named his dog after him.
Yeah. It's nice to have dogs named after you. It keeps you out there. But the Everybody Loves Raymond was really a lot of fun. And what's really interesting about that, we filmed that 1999. So what is that, 21, 22 years? And I still have people coming up to me and saying, they named a dog after you. And Everybody Loves Raymond. But it was great. The producer of the show, Phil Rosenthal, who I had on as one of my guests on the podcast a while back, grew up in Flushing, and he was a big Met fan, and I guess he liked me, and that's how it all came about. But doing the show was really exciting. I got a chance to meet Ray Romano and Brad Garrett and Peter Boyle, and everybody was on the show, and it was wonderful. And we got the rest of the 6 or 7 of the teammates to come on, and they still rerun those shows, and people I still laugh at them. I watch them every night. I mean, there's some of their shows are just they're really funny, and I really enjoy it. But it's another thing to be able to say I did, and people like to talk about it. So it was a lot of fun.
So I want to end this portion by bringing out the personal fan in you. We all have, I guess, ideas and tweaks and adjustments and suggestions for the game. For your perspective as a former player, playing back then with all those great players, watching how the game has developed and changed in the last 50 years, what would be your personal suggestion now for the game that you think would improve it?
Well, I definitely think this changing of pitchers really delays the game. I think guys stepping out. It used to be you'd step out, you wouldn't even get out of the batter's box. You kind of just take a step out and look at the third base coach, and then you're right back in. I think that's delayed the game. I think the game is much slower, although there's no clock in baseball, so it's hard to argue that that's a problem. But I do believe it slows up the game, and I think there's so little action now. There's just not much. You can any given game that I mentioned before is that look at this number of strikeouts. Now I know the pitchers are throwing hard. I can agree with that. Whether they're throwing harder now than when I played, who knows? Maybe they are. Maybe with technology and the way they practice and the way they do things and medical issues and everything, they're able to throw harder. But throwing hard, it never bothered me. I faced some guys that could really throw hard. I don't know how many good pitchers there are out there. And so I think what we see is a lot of strikeouts. And I think, going back to what I said, I really believe that a lot of these hitters are overmatched because they don't face good pitching in the minor leagues. They're rushed to the big leagues, and anybody that throws hard is going to strike them out. You see, take a look at the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th batters. Now, I'm assuming it's an American League because you'll have a 9th batter in the American League. And even the DH, look at how bad some of those swings are at the plate. Just look at how bad they're fooled on certain pitches. They haven't faced good pitching. And I think if you took more time in the minor leagues with guys, but the problem with that is the argument is that the teams say, hey, we invested a lot of money in a guy. We're going to get him to the big leagues. We don't have a lot of time to develop him. And I think consequently, it ends up costing you their ability in the big leagues. And I think they're overmatched by pitchers. And I think that's part of the problem. And again, I'll just say this. If you look at the strikeouts and you look at the walks, you'll understand, in my mind, there's not any action in the game. Yeah, there'll be a double, a home run, a couple base hits, but there's just not constant action. You're just seeing a lot of strikeouts, a lot of walks, and I think in today's world, people want to, it's everything. Compared to the other sports. It's football. We're in a world of everything's going on with football. The draft's coming up. Everybody's watching that. The team here in this area, it's the Jets and the Giants, and they're really into that because it's movement that's going on. Hockey, we up and down the ice. I mean, there's nothing like playoff hockey. We all love that. And basketball, it's running down the court, whether you like the sport or not, but there's action. Compared to all the major sports, baseball is just slow and it's deliberate. And it was sort of like meant to be that way, but there was always something going on when, double plays, bunt plays, just things going on, moving the runners around, sacrifice flies, whatever it might be. And I think we're in a world now that doesn't have much of that. And I think consequently it's come back to bite us, a little bit.
No doubt about it. When you find out you're getting traded to the Mets, who from their inception at that point were the worst team in baseball, what was the reaction? And you get to the Big Apple and you're a Midwest guy. What was your reaction there when you finally come to New York and put on the orange and blue?
Well, the truth is I was devastated. I mean, I came from the Cincinnati organization that always had good teams. We had, just really good teams. The National League was a tough league back then. We didn't win any pennants when I was there, but always in the mix. And we always had really good teams. And And the first time you get traded is always a shock. You're leaving guys that you started your careers with. And as I mentioned before, the winter I got traded at 67, Johnny Bench came up to the big leagues. Rose was on that team. Um, um, Frank Robbins had been traded, but Pinson was around, Veda Pinson, Tony Perez, Lee May, Tommy Helms, all guys that were really good players, Tommy Harper. So for me, it was just a little bit of shock. And I wasn't crazy about New York when we came here as a visiting team and played the Mets. Mets were not a very good team, and wasn't crazy about New York. It was really kind of big, even though I came through a decent sized city in the Midwest. But when I heard about the trade, I was a little bit of shock. Again, the first time you get traded is always a bit of some bad news for you. But then I heard about was to the Mets. It was the one team I didn't want to go to because they were not a good team, and I wasn't crazy about New York. But to make a long story short, when I got here, I made some friends, and I came at the same time that Gil Hodges came as the manager, Tommy Agee, J.C. Martin, Al Weiss, a number of players came at the same time. And when I made the friends I made, you really kind of smoothed over the transition. And then, of course, we won the World Series in '69 the next year. And my life changed when we won the World Series. And I've been in New York ever since. So fell in love with the city, and it's been very special to me. And again, when you win in World's Championship, no matter what sport, and particularly in New York City, your life's always going to change. And that particular team, as you guys know, you weren't even born when it happened, but you have to understand what was going on in the city and the country at the time with the war in Vietnam and where the Mets came from the time they started in '62 to 1969, known as the lovable losers. Everybody thought every year they're going to lose 100 games. For us to win a world championship just made everybody just kind of forget about what was going on in the world at the time. We're in a world that's upside down now, but back then it was really with the war in Vietnam, and city of New York was going under financially and spiritually, socially, everything. And so we made people feel better about their lives. So I know the original question was how about getting traded, but it all kind of went back by pretty quick after we won the World Series. And the good friends I made on the team, Eddie Kranepool, Kenny Boswell, Kuzman, Seaver, Harrelson, Swoboda, Cleon Jones and Tommy Agee, Ed Charles, Clendenin, all those guys who we became so close. And the book that you mentioned before that I wrote called After the Miracle was a 50th year anniversary of that wonderful team. We had the anniversary in 2019. And the book is really about the friendships that we developed over those years and how it all came together when we won, and how we've maintained those relationships over these 50 years. Now it's 52 years, but it always helped that when you came from nowhere and won a world championship, all of our lives changed on that October day. And so another long-winded answer to that question of yours, but it was kind of a down time for me when I got traded, but it turned out much better. It changed my life and when we won. And so, what's interesting about that team, and again, you guys are too young, but I think people of any age will always know that the New York Yankees won in 1927 with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and the rest of those great players are on the team. And people will always remember that in 1969, the New York Mets won the World Championship. So to be part of that is always going to be special in my life.
Yeah, the Miracle Mets, you always hear about them still to this day. When it's a great legacy. You're playing at that time at a state-of-the-art stadium at Chase Stadium, which I really miss most of my childhood there, watching the games with my dad. But I want to know, at what point in the '69 season did Gil Hodges really get you all to buy in? And at what point did you say to yourself, wow, you know what? I think we could really do this. And then obviously you win the World Series. What was it like just that whole off season, knowing that you were the champions?
Well, what's interesting is I'm going to go back a year, 1968, my first year there. I remember we went to spring training, and I really didn't know anybody. I played against some of the guys, even in the minor leagues and then in the big leagues. I knew Tug McGraw, and I knew a couple of the guy Crane, like I said before. And I remember the first day in spring training in '68, Gil Hodges had a meeting, and I never had met Gil. I knew he was a great player with the Dodgers, but I never really didn't know much about him. And he had this meeting, and he said, from now on, you guys will remember you're not going to be the same old Mets you've been in the past. Well, I wasn't there in those years, but I could tell right then he was serious about trying to get us, the team, to play better than they've shown in the first few years of their existence. And we didn't play well in '68, but you could see that was the beginning of some good pitching and some timely hitting. And then in '69, we had spring training. Even though we didn't play that great in '68, we finished ninth, I think a half game out of last place. There was only one National League at that time, and then they went into two divisions in '69. He had another meeting in spring training. He said, you guys lost, I think he had a number, forget, it was somewhere between 35 and 40. We lost 35 to 40 one-run games. And he said, if you just win some of those games, that changes your whole season. And he was right. We didn't know how to win in those years when I was with the Mets, first years. And we started to play better baseball in '69. Still, as we got into the summer and into the beginning of August, we were still 9 games behind the Cubs. But we were starting to win close games. And I don't mean 2-1 games or 3-2 games. I'm talking about 7-6, 8-7. We had to find ways to win games no matter what the score was. And that was what Gil kind of instilled in us. And from about the 1st of August on, when we started to play a little bit better, but we still were 9 games behind the Cubs, we knew that we had a good team. But when we started on a roll, which was around the middle of August, we became unbeatable. And we overtook the Cubs. And it wasn't so much that they played bad baseball. We just played incredible baseball. And then from that point on, we were just unbeatable. And we went into the playoffs and swept the Braves in 3, and then lost the first game in the World Series to a terrific Baltimore Oriole team, and then won the next 4 in a row. But I have the distinction of making the last out of the only game we lost in the World Series. Made the last out on that Saturday against Baltimore. Mike Cuellar was pitching, but we won the next 4 in a row, and the rest is history. But I don't know if there was one game in that season or one play that made a difference. It was just our belief that we had the good pitching, we had terrific defense up the middle, and really good timely hitting. And I think all of us, looking back, one of the beauties of that team and one of the legacies of that team is that you just don't talk about Tom Seaver and Jerry Kuzma. You talk about Al Weiss, you talk about Clendenin and Ed Charles and Wayne Garrett. I mean, every name comes up because everybody contributed to that success of that team. And I think that's the beauty of it. And people have passed that on. Like I said, you guys weren't even born, but you know about that team from your parents and your grandparents. And you mentioned that you used to come to Shea when you were real little. Well, the reality of it is, when they tore that park down, part of my youth was taken from me. I love Shea. There was something about Shea Stadium, even with the planes driving you crazy over from LaGuardia, and even with the stadium itself not being the best condition, but the field itself was great. And when they tore that down, like you probably, some of my youth was taken from me, and I remember it well. But that year was always special. And I played 13 years total with the minor leagues in baseball and the big leagues. And nobody ever talks about the other 12. It's really about 1969, and I understand it. And it's great. It's fine with me.
Well, we do want to bring up a great point, and so we've had a lot of very special guests on our podcast. So I want to channel the spirit of somebody that we really enjoyed having on, Sarah Langs, who does amazing work for ESPN. She's a huge Mets fan. She's a huge stats person. So I believe in the spirit of her, she's going to appreciate this stat. You are in a very distinct class of players. You are one of 43 players in the history of Major League Baseball who has hit a home run in 4 consecutive at-bats. And the last time that it happened was last year when Jose Abreu, defending American League MVP, did it. So is there anything that you remember about that certain stretch of at-bats? Because you are in a very illustrious, all-time, exclusive club. 43 players of the thousands of players who have played the game, and you did something that nobody else did.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. But here's there's a little addendum to that. I think I'm the only one of all those that hit 3 in a game, hit 3 in one game, and then 1 the next game. But I didn't start the first game and hit the 3. Came in the 7th inning, hit 2 in extra innings, which you think you'd win the game,
Wow.
losing that game. But I do believe, and you can check this out with any of the whoever does these records and stuff. I do believe I'm the only player in baseball history to hit 3 in a game that wasn't in the starting lineup when that game started. So that's a little bit of addendum to that. But those 4 home runs in a row are very special to me. The bat's in the Hall of Fame on display. It was one of those 2-game things that you just it's hard to imagine. Sometimes, very rarely, the ball looks a little bigger than it normally does, but on most occasion, it's pretty small. And so that particular period, for whatever reason, I was in a groove. And but what's interesting about those 4 home runs, it was over 2 games. We lost both the games, and so that kind of took something away from it. But it's another thing to be able to talk about it and laugh about it. But it was a wonderful time, a period of my. I was with the Reds at the time, and it was just one of these moments that you can't explain. It's just it happens, and I appreciate you bringing it up, and I'm very happy to be part of that group. But and it's interesting. On the 5th at bat, we were in Los Angeles. We traveled out to Los Angeles, and I didn't start the game for whatever reason. I had 4 home runs in a row and don't start the game. The manager was Dave Bristol. He sent me up to pinch hit in the 7th or 8th inning. I'll never forget this. The pitcher was a guy named Bob Miller. Threw pretty hard for the Dodgers. And I hit a ball right field for a base hit. If I would have got that ball up, it would have been out of the ballpark. If's a big word, but I hit it right on the button, single to right field, but pinch hitting. So I had 5 or 6 hits in a row, but the 4 home runs in a row were very, very special.
Yeah, certainly a great accomplishment. Now, you talked about your teammates and how you all stayed in touch and how everything changed after the World Series. We had Jay Horwitz on our show. Wanted to know, your thoughts on the job he's doing in his alumni relations role and how things have really changed for you and your teammates now ever since the Mets have had somebody in that role.
Well, Jay's a terrific guy. I first met him when I was broadcasting the Mets games in 79, 80, and 81. I came over when Mr. Wilpon and Doubleday bought the team, and Frank Cashin hired him to be the PR director of the Mets. So I've met him way back. That was, I believe, 1980. And we've been friends ever since. The Mets, for whatever reason, over the years, never had anybody in alumni relations. And unfortunately, they didn't do much in that regard. And Jay took that over when he left the PR part of the Mets job. And he's great. He's doing it now. And they've got a newsletter out, and he's constantly calling me for stuff. And I pick his brain occasionally for things. And so he's a good guy and well-deserved. And there's no perfect person to be in that position than Jay Horwitz. I mean, he's perfect for that job. And so I'm glad he's doing it, and he'll do a great job with new ownership out there. And I'm sure he'll be great. And I'm hoping that whatever happens this season with the Mets, no matter what happens from now into the future, the Mets will look back on their history a little bit better than they have in the past. They had 2 World Championship teams and a couple others that were in the World Series, but they have a pretty good past, and so they should take advantage of it. And I have a feeling they will. And Jay's been great, and I'm sure he'll do a good job out there.
Yeah, hopefully, new owner Steve Cohen mentioned this. Hopefully, 2022 we finally get a Mets old timers game. I think that'd be a lot of fun for the fans.
Well, I hope so. I know they're going to retire Jerry Kuzman's number this year. I don't know if that's going to be out there in front of fans. I don't know how they're going to do it. And I know they're going to dedicate a statue to Tom Seaver. I think that's scheduled on an off day. I'm not sure why that's happening like that, but those kind of things should be in front of fans. Fans should get an opportunity to see the history of that ball club. And I hope in Jerry's case, because he's still around and what a wonderful guy he is, that it is in front of a crowd, and it was supposed to have been last year, and of course it got canceled or postponed till this year. But in Jerry and Kuzman's case, just as an addendum to all this stuff, he was a terrific pitcher, and if we don't win game 2 of the World Series that he pitched in, we're liable to lose 4 in a row to Baltimore. Pitched a great game on that Sunday and pitched a clincher when we won the World Series on that Thursday, the 16th of October. So well deserved that he's getting his number retired, but one of the mainstays of that team, along with so many other people. But Jerry was a terrific pitcher.
So I want to take you back and talk about not only did the Mets win in 1969, but the Jets, Joe Namath, one famous Super Bowl III game against the Colts, right? So we had the whole New York-Baltimore thing going on. The Knicks came back the year after, and they won their first championship in franchise history. So you had a period there where all 3 franchises ended up winning their first championship in a very close period of time together. And as a Midwestern boy who didn't want to come to New York, it seems like you remember that time pretty fondly, and you turned that into quite the opportunity here with both your books. So your first book is The Magnificent Seasons, which is those 3 teams, those 3 seasons collectively. You follow that with the After the Miracle book. So what I want to ask you is, when did you get the itch to want to write the books? Because something specific usually happens where kind of have this idea planted, not everybody can write or not everybody wants to write it. It's a very tedious process. So what was the motivation behind writing those books, and when did you receive it?
That's a great question, because, I was thinking about that when reminiscing a little bit about how this all came about. When we tried to do a 25th anniversary for the Mets in 1994, and we got all the guys together, and this was 25 years later, and we would do these things, and I saw this adulation from fans who still idolized this team. They adored these teams. Everybody was around. McGill had passed away. I think Cal Kuntz had passed away. I'm not sure if Rube Walker was still around, and we only had lost 3 or 4 guys at the most. So we still had a strong nucleus, and we would do these appearances, and we formed this organization, this corporation, Miracle of 1969, and we would do these things, and we put out some products, and it was just really great. And I'd see these crowds come to be with us and hang out with us, and this is 25 years later, and I said, this is phenomenal. I mean, it's hard to imagine these people that are still wanted to see us. And I started to think about it, and then I realized, the Jets won in January, we won in October, and the Knicks won in May of '70. I'm friends with all these guys on these teams. We became really close. All of us won for the first time. Nobody had ever won before. The Jets hadn't won, and the Knicks hadn't won. Everybody thought the Knicks had won before. We hadn't won, obviously. And so I decided to write about these 3 teams, because in a time that we spoke about earlier was such a down time for people, these 3 teams kind of brightened people's outlook on life, because so many people were going through so many problems. And so I wrote this book, and I did all this research and spent hours upon hours, did over 100 interviews with guys, and I got teams that players from other teams that each of us beat. I talked to Don Shula. I talked to a lot of the Colt players that they beat in the then was called the Super Bowl. It was the first year of the Super Bowl. Before that, it was a championship game. And of course, Namath, Joe wrote one of the forwards along with Bill Bradley and Tom Seaver. So I was looking for a copy of it, and I've got it somewhere. I was going to show you, but it was a labor of love. I did a lot of research on it, and so that came about in around the mid '90s, and then got it out the early part of 2000, and it was really a wonderful book talking about all 3 teams and what we accomplished. The second one really was myself and Eric Sherman, who was a terrific writer, sitting down and talking about writing something for this 50th anniversary of the Mets. Now you have to remember this: there's more books have been written about the '69 Mets than any team in any sports history. I'm talking books upon books upon books. So what are you going to write about? Everybody's heard the stories that they want to, everybody's heard about this, about that. You got to write something different. And I said, well, it's going to be a reunion. let's talk about the relationships that we had developed on this team and how we still have these wonderful relationships. And that's how that book came about. And that book made the New York Times bestseller, and it's on my website if anybody's interested. I always recommend people getting the book on my website because I can write a personal salutation for them. So I have both the books and some memorabilia on my website. And so that book was really something special. And Eric Sherman, who co-wrote it with me, did a great job. And it really was a 50-year anniversary about this relationship of all the players and how we still maintain a relationship. I think we've lost 10 or 11 guys from that team, but there's still that nucleus of guys that are around. And luckily we're still friends and share these wonderful moments that we all got a chance to be heroes for a period of time. And people still remember that. I run into people who weren't even born who know about that team, like I said, from their parents and their grandparents. Kids don't even know, but they can rattle out the names of the players on the team, and it just amazes me that it's still viable, and it just shows how important that team was to the city of New York.
Yeah, I think for generations they'll continue to hear about that team. And finally, the Mets, with Citi Field, they did a good job with that little museum when you first come in the rotunda there. So always great. Always enjoy going in there, looking at some stuff from 1969. You mentioned 1994. How much of a tremendous honor was it for you to be inducted into the National Jewish Hall of Fame?
Well, it was a great honor because you really didn't know about it. Somebody just said, "Hey, you've been inducted into this Hall of Fame," and so I guess anytime you get inducted to Hall of Fame, it's great. So it's special. I've had a lot of youngsters come up to me over the years and say, and parents say to me, that you were an inspiration to me. Anytime you can affect somebody's life in a positive way, I think you've accomplished something. And I look at it that if I've affected somebody in a good way, then I've done something special. So I look at that as just something that I always consider myself a baseball player who happened to be Jewish. So it wasn't a thing where it was so predominant in my life that it took over everything, but it just part of my life, and so I accept it. But I'm glad it's a positive in so many people's mind.
And you are instrumental in growing the game, especially in Israel. So I want to ask you about the growth of the game, not only just there, but also kind of worldwide too. What actions do you think the country took to welcome baseball, to be able to develop the game a little better? A lot of players I know who play there are people who migrated from here, who were born here and are trying to grow the game there, which I think is, one of the more important parts to all this. But what can you speak about in terms of growing the game, how it's grown in Israel and other places around the world where you think baseball could thrive with given the right resources and environment and attention to detail, et cetera?
Well, it all started for me with Israel when I was asked to manage over there in 2007. They started a league, and my first reaction was I wasn't going to do it because who knew what was going on? I'd never been to Israel. Baseball wasn't a big sport over there, and the more I thought about it, the more I said, "Wait, this could be something interesting." And make a long story short, I ended up doing it, and they decided to start this league over there called the Israel Baseball League. Unfortunately, it only lasted 1 year. It wasn't, the conditions weren't great. It was kind of mismanaged to some extent, but it was baseball at its purest. There wasn't really any fields. They had one ballpark, which was ironically owned by the Baptist Church over in Israel, and that was the only really good field. They built a couple things just to play in, and it was like growing up playing on fields that you never thought would be considered baseball fields. But I really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful 3 months. I managed some really interesting young guys, and it wasn't all young. There was some guys in their 30s who for whatever reason wanted to play baseball. But like I said, it only lasted 1 year. But I'm very happy in the sense that I was part of the start of the development of the game in Israel. And as it turned out, they now have gone on to really field some good teams. Their problem was that they didn't have it they didn't have it in schools. There was no competitive baseball, so it was really kids that most Americans that had moved over there started to play, and then they started to get some Israeli kids involved, and from that league in 2007, they started to develop the game, and now they've been in the World Baseball Classic a couple times, and the last time they went, I think, to the second or third round, and I guess there's going to be an Olympics this year. If there is, they're going to have a team because baseball was back this year, so who knows what's going to happen there. But I really feel happy that I was part of this group of people that, and I've been back a couple times to do some clinics, and I was part of this group that really kind of got the game started over there, and I think we were the catalyst that really got Israel involved in wanting to develop the game. And again, the game of baseball, as I mentioned before, is a wonderful sport to develop friendships, and I have no doubt in my mind if there could be some meeting of the minds with some Israeli kids and some Arab kids and some people from all around, and they got it together and played baseball, who knows what that could develop into in terms of friendships and where it could go with that. So baseball is a wonderful sport to do that. Their problem over there has always been fields to be able to play the games. They just didn't have any. And so as people have started to make donations and they started to raise money, and then now are aware of it because of the World Baseball Classic and the Olympics, that who knows what might be happening. But again, my feeling about it is for those of us who went over, it was myself, Kenny Holtzman, Ron Bloomberg managed over there, and two or three other guys that they got to manage. And so we were all part of this development of the game over there. And in terms of the question you asked about other places in the world, I think if they can just kind of get their act together, Major League Baseball in some way, and work on developing the game in all these other places. You know, it's big down in South America and Venezuela, and down in Mexico and Puerto Rico and Dominican. But if they can, and then start and then do it, they do have leagues in Europe and they have leagues in Australia. So it's not like it's just here in this country. They're starting to expand on it. And I think as people play it and get to know it and fall in love with the game, you know, there's no way where to go but up. And so I think that would be the best scenario.
All right, thank you for doing this interview with us. We had a lot of fun. It was an honor. Had a really, really great baseball discussion. I think a lot of what Nick and I believe about the game are sentiments that you share. You know, we grew up very old school kind of families. I grew up a Yankees fan. He grew up a Mets fan. But again, a lot of commonalities in terms of how we feel about the game. We had a really, really fun discussion. This was a lot of fun to do. So what we do here is we usually give our guests the last words. You mentioned your website before, a lot of great memorabilia, the opportunity to get something personalized by you. You have a great podcast, you know, so you can share that with our listeners. But again, you know, we give our guests the last words. So if there's anything else you would like to share on top of that, or if there's anything else you would like to promote, go ahead. The floor is all yours.
I just want to say you guys did a great job. You asked great questions. I can tell you're avid baseball fans, and to your credit, just stay with it, and maybe we'll get the game going to where it should be. But it's still one of the most enjoyable games there is, and I hope the fans can appreciate getting back out there. Hopefully the fans there'll be some full stadiums sometime soon. But as you mentioned, yeah, I do the podcast. It's the Art Shamsky podcast, for lack of a better name. But so I'm on all the major podcast platforms: iHeart, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, and I do it every other week. And I try to do a combination of sports and some entertainment. And I try to get, you know, as an example, I've had Joe Namath on and a number of big name people, but you know, some of these people have been on podcasts and interviews for so many times. I just try to get people to talk about some things that maybe they haven't talked about before, and not anything that's risque or anything like that, but just some interesting stuff. And I just did a podcast the other day that's up now with Carl Erskine, who was a great pitcher with the Brooklyn Dodgers in the late 40s and 50s. And for me, what a thrill to be able to talk to somebody like that. And I idolized him as a kid. And so that I do the podcast. I'm on Twitter at Art Shamsky, and I have the website artshamsky.com, and I have some memorabilia on it. And again, I like people if they're interested in the book or one of my books to get it through the website, because I can do a personal salutation. I like to get close and personal to somebody. Not well. Let me rephrase that. I like to get personal to somebody. If they want something from me, I like to be able to tell them hello and say what they like me to say on the book. And so for me, that's always great. And I also have some other memorabilia on the website. So all is good. So, and again, thank you for having me on. You guys did a great job, and best of luck to you. And you asked great questions. So I hope I was able to answer them in a way that sounded okay.
Absolutely, Art. It was a real pleasure. We had a great discussion. We love talking baseball with you and hearing about your career. Art is also on Cameo. If you want a personalized video, go to cameo.com/sham24. Art, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right for our very special guest, World Series champion and New York Times best-selling author Art Shamsky, and my co-host Joe Calabrese. I am Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.